Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program today titled A Possible Answer for Barriers Caregivers Experience when Implementing Behavioral Recommendations and Practical Guidance for Effective Service Delivery. So my name is Dr. Nuhu, and I am the co-chair of the Atlanta Autism Consortium Board of Directors. So the Atlanta Autism Consortium is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to creating collaborative conversations throughout the Metro Atlanta autism community and beyond. We really focus on hosting free programs like this one on a wide variety of topics, and are really happy that you guys have joined us today to learn more. So before we get started, just a few brief housekeeping notes. Please keep in mind that as an attendee, your microphone and camera will remain muted. But you can ask any questions through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So at the end, when our speaker is done, I'll be reading those questions out and we can have a discussion via that format. Additionally, we will be emailing out the contact information of our panelists to the email addresses that you use to register for this program, so you can contact them directly with any questions you may have. So tonight we are joined by Dr. Jennifer Honnett. She is a psychologist in the Severe Behavior Department at the Marcus Autism Center. Thank you so much, Dr. Honnett, for joining us tonight and sharing your work. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. So we'll jump right in. There we go. So this evening, I'd like to kind of start with giving you a little bit of background on where I come from and some of the current directions that I'm headed. And I'd like for us to kind of have a discussion about how we're impacted by behaviors that are targeted for reduction. Why is it so hard to implement behavior recommendations? How can we better identify barriers to make implementation a little bit easier? And what are some of those things that we can do along the way? So being an individual that absolutely embraces that she is from the South, and in honor of us being right in the middle of football season, I thought that I would share a little bit about my journey with the help of some college mascots. So I started my journey as a Blazer from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. After a number of very spirited conversations with my father, I graduated with a degree in psychology. And despite those very spirited conversations, I was able to put that degree to use, and I embraced Hope and Will, our official, unofficial mascots from the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and partnership with the Marcus Autism Center. And so I accepted an entry-level position at the Marcus Autism Center, and that was in 2007. And so over the years, I changed roles and positions. I welcomed new responsibilities along the way. And despite the various positions I served in, I was constantly focusing on developing my clinical skills with individuals who exhibited complex, challenging behavior. And it really was this work that confirmed that I was on the right path. And so that confirmation and identifying opportunities for expanding my skill set really propelled me to take on yet another mascot. So I joined entered a master's program at Georgia State University and became a Panther. And there I completed that degree and later went on to become a board certified behavior analyst. And so in my clinical work, I remained focused on complex behavior presentations and serving these individuals and their families. Once again, I had room to grow, and I knew that I had a number of opportunities to continue to expand that skill set. So I traveled down to Florida and became here we go, and became a University of South Florida Bull. It was there that I completed a PhD program in school psychology. And so after finishing my PhD in school psychology, I actually was able to return to my home mascots, Hope and Will, and am now serving at Marcus as a clinical faculty member. My current role allows me to add Emory Eagles to my collection, as well as becoming a Georgia Bulldog in the role of an instructor for their master's program in applied behavior analysis. The twists and turns of this 16-year professional adventure has really led me down a path of investigating how to most effectively assess and the intervention of significant and complex behaviors targeted for reduction. So to dig in a little deeper, research and our experiences indicate that challenging behavior impacts individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And they impact these individuals through an increased risk of injury, difficulty with establishing and maintaining social connections, experiencing limitations on their ability to access services, issues related to skill acquisition, and the possibility of requiring intensive and sometimes invasive services. Often as clinicians, our focus is on our most direct client, the individual exhibiting the complex or the challenging behavior. However, short and long-term consequences exist for our caregivers as well. They too are at an increased risk of injury. Similarly, they experience interference with making and maintaining social connections. Complex and challenging behavior may interrupt their employment. And evidence within literature is clear that challenging behavior can result in marital discord and financial burden. The long-term effects of parent stress are troubling, and they indicate poor well-being and mental health concerns. Evidence suggests that we feel an economic impact when caregivers can't administer behavior recommendations, as well as experiencing individual consequences. And this could include requiring higher doses of intervention, which is either being exposed to longer durations of intervention or more invasive forms of intervention. And that is often required for effectiveness to be observed. So as a practitioner, I naturally am reflecting on the root cause associated with this non-adherence. Along my journey of serving individuals, I expanded both my clinical and research efforts to include how we can best serve our caregivers. And one way I'm evaluating our partnership with caregivers and how well we're serving them is looking at the possible connection between post-traumatic stress or PTSD and significant and complex challenging behavior. The DSM-5 outlines PTSD as a mental health illness. This illness involves persistent cognitions, feelings of detachment, and dysfunction throughout one's daily life. Overall lifetime prevalence in the United States is currently between 8 and 9% of the population. So commonly individuals associate a PTSD with images of being exposed to combat situations in wartime, links to experiencing connections of going through natural disasters or undergoing personal tragedy, being party of a violent crime. So thinking back to the impact that we know that is associated with severe and complex challenging behavior in combination with what we know about PTSD, it isn't a big leap to see how there may be connections between the two. This brings us to how we are currently exploring that connection. Right now, we are recruiting participants and administering study measures for a pilot study. The objective of this study is to examine the presence or absence of an association between the significant challenging behavior caregivers encounter and their reported symptomology. Right now, we're using a group design where we compare a control group. So those are our caregivers who do not encounter challenging behavior from their child. And we compare that to participants in our comparison group, or the caregivers who do encounter challenging behavior from their child. The study consists of caregiver questionnaires that include the PTSD checklist for the DSM-5. This is a self-report measure. There's 20 items, and it really is looking to quantify and monitor symptoms over time. Clinicians use this as a screening for a clinical diagnosis of PTSD. And they have a diagnostic criteria or a cutoff score, and that score range is 31 to 33. So any participant that receives, their responses receive a 31 to 33 score, they that would stand as being able to make a provisional diagnosis for PTSD. We also administer the life events checklist for the DSM-5. Again, this is a self-report measure that caregivers would complete. There's 17 items, and while there's no formal scoring profile, so a score doesn't indicate that an individual is showing symptoms or signs of PTSD or not, it does serve to ask further questions and to indicate if an individual has experienced one or more exposure to what is considered typically traumatic stimuli. And then the last measure of the study that we administer is what we call our Aberrant Behavior Checklist, or the ABC2. This is a caregiver rating scale, and it is a questionnaire that asks about different behaviors that their child may or may not exhibit. And while there are a number of scales on this individual checklist, for these study measures, we are really interested in the irritability scale. And so that really hones in on either the presence or absence of significant and complex challenging behavior. So here is a preliminary glimpse at a sample of our participants. I'll give you just a minute to kind of consume the data. And so here, just as kind of an overarching view of the data that's been collected thus far, we can see that 5 out of the 11 participants that are presented in this sample, or 45% of the respondents, offered responses that fall within the PTSD diagnostic cutoff range, which remember is between 31 and 33. Alongside these scores, we see our irritability subscale score ranging from 9 to 42. And just for a little context, the ceiling score, so the highest that an individual could score on that irritability subscale, is 45. So at this stage in our investigation, we can examine these results to draw on some preliminary implications for moving forward. Caregiver experiences influence their level of involvement, and this can be directly linked to adhering or following behavior recommendations. When we really consider the symptoms of PTSD, we can see a repeating theme with avoiding stimuli that is associated with traumatic events or the traumatic event for that individual. Adhering or following behavioral recommendations is really is really the opposite of avoidance, which is inherent to the PTSD diagnosis. What we can gather from this is a more comprehensive and complex approach to serving families is needed, where we focus on caregiver mental well-being along with the focusing on the complex and severe challenging behavior. More accurate diagnoses and more awareness to one's own mental health well-being could result in contacting more appropriate services for our caregivers. So why is it so hard to implement behavior recommendations? Our literature would suggest that caregiver stress and strain play a major role. The caregiver's mental health challenges are part of the equation when we look at are caregivers able to implement behavior recommendations or not? Feeling a lack of support is often cited, and that goes hand in hand with feeling that there are inadequate resources available. It's well documented that caregivers of children with autism spectrum disorder experience significant levels of stress, even at higher rates than parents of children who have other developmental disabilities or are considered typically developing. Research indicates that parents are less likely to follow behavior recommendations when they're overly stressed. Again, caregivers may avoid behavior recommendations. Specifically, those caregivers experiencing traumatic events with their child may be less likely to implement those behavior recommendations that are meant to address the traumatic events that the caregiver is experiencing with their child. Alongside the inadequate support, feelings of anxiety and apprehension may result in non-adherence as caregivers feel under-supported. So, how can we better identify our own barriers? What does our stress look like? One practical step that we can take is being cognizant of our own behavior, being cognizant of what our behavior looks like when we are operating under stress or operating under elevated levels of stress. What does our physical health journey look like? Our physical health connects to our stress level and may impact our ability to follow and adhere to treatment recommendations. Are we using our social supports? Are we reaching out to friends and family? Are we making connections with our church family? Do we have access to message boards, support groups? Are there podcasts or programs that we can listen to or consume that may help us feel more socially connected? Are we attending to the connection with our child? So feeling disconnected can make following recommendations more difficult or more arduous. Spending time engaging in an activity that doesn't necessarily relate to behavior recommendations can go a really long way with making connections with your child that can help with adhering and following treatment recommendations or behavioral recommendations. So in the moment, managing tough situations can often lead to not being able to follow behavior recommendations. So one piece of advice is to try and remain present in the moment. What do you hear? What do you smell? In the moment, where you are, being able to try to have some touch points to kind of bring you back when you're in the middle of a tough situation and you feel the stress and strain kind of piling up. Try and take a moment to be aware of those feelings. So it's okay to take a beat and step away. Another opportunity to manage some of our stress and strain in those in the moment tough situations can be to try to hold an image of a serene location or a calm scene in your mind's eye. A lot of times people say taking a trip to your happy place. It sounds kind of funny and a little hokey, but it may be the kind of breath of fresh air that you need and that reset so that then you can go back to adhering behavior recommendations and following the treatment recommendations in those really kind of tough situations. And then finally, being kind to yourself, giving yourself the grace to understand that you are doing your very best and that managing those tough situations is really tough, and that you're present, and even though it may not feel like a win, you've already started headed towards the finish line. So aside from in the moment, another other guidance that we have is creating routines of self-care. So being able to first really identify that self-care, there is the ideal self-care, which would be going to places like Chateau Alon on a regular basis and hitting up the spa and taking really long naps, and giving yourself pedicures each self-care Sunday, and then being able to really take a good look at the reality of the resources that you have, the time that you have, and what self-care can look like for you. So it's okay to settle into your feelings and emotions. And so acknowledging those feelings and allowing yourself to feel those. Part of being able to be in the moment and feel validated in those emotions and those sometimes big feelings, a lot of times the other side of that is to invalidate or to ignore the feelings, and the big emotions, and kind of push those away. But we would encourage you to try to avoid invalidating that. Being able to establish boundaries for yourself, being able to understand where you need to kind of draw the line to make sure that you are continuing to take care of yourself, so that you can continue to take care, and caregivers can continue to take care of their children. Making sure that you're allocating energy to the things that are within your control. So there may be a number of things that are in the checklist that need to be done, or the things that need to be taken care of. But are those the things that are within your control? And are those the things that need your energy in that moment? Some more practical and kind of being able to implement them just about anywhere includes some relaxation routines. So making sure take 5 is one. So taking 5 minutes to really be able to like sit in a moment, realize that you're doing a great job, use some of your deep breathing practices, use some of your visualization practices. So like the slide before was suggesting, go into your mind's eye of your happy place, and some of those routines that really don't take a lot of resources, and really are just kind of consuming time, may be an easy way to kind of incorporate those relaxation routines in a more regular part of your day. And then a good suggestion is trying to find a piece of time each day for a really healthy glass of water, and making sure that you're protecting that time for yourself. So as caregivers, they are the most important factor in a child's growth and development. And when a caregiver is at their best, you're able to best and better help your child. So some ways that we can, put some self-care into, and address kind of one's own mental health, is a growing field, which is self-care technology. And so one example is the It's All About You app. It is an interactive app that provides tips and reminders, to really kind of capitalize on those everyday moments, and turn those into opportunities to rest, recharge, and reset. And so really it gives you opportunities of whether celebrating the good times or showing your self-care, it allows you to take a topic that you're interested in and really kind of further explore it. Another option that can really help addressing one's own mental health are support groups. And so, while we are back to a primarily in-person existence these days, the advent of online support groups have really taken hold. And for a lot of our caregivers, online support groups really offer the flexibility to be able to add that in to an already hectic day and an already kind of a hectic schedule oftentimes. And so here are two examples of some support groups that offer a lot of social connection and the benefits of being able to collaborate and partner with other people that may have similar journeys. And then another opportunity to address mental health is to consider respite care. Autism Speaks actually has a really excellent resource guide where you can investigate your area of town, your area of the state, and it is the resource guide is actually nationwide, but you can go in and explore different respite caregivers or respite care providers and explore if that is an option that would fit into your self-care routine or into you addressing your own mental health. And so just to kind of bring us to a conclusion, I put together a few resources. The state of Georgia's website has a number of different resources that are really focused on health and wellness for caregivers and parents, as well as a variety of different options for home services and support networks across the state. And I believe that Dr. Nuhu's shared that this material would be made available, I believe, after the talk. So that way everyone can have access to the various resources and hyperlinks. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I would love to open the floor for questions or comments or further discussion.
Thank you so much. I have the chat open, so if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat and we can spend some time discussing. I can start us off with a question. Could you kind of walk us through, or just kind of like let us know your thoughts of how a caregiver could start a conversation with a clinician or their child's provider regarding the complexity of a treatment, if that's part of, they're attempting to kind of care for themselves, they're attempting to make sure that their mental health is where it needs to be, but kind of maybe how to have that conversation with the provider in a way that can help them problem solve.
Absolutely, and I think that is a wonderful question, and I think that in itself can be a whole nother conversation and presentation. But I think transparency is key. So I think the more transparent that providers and caregivers can be with one another, the more effective the partnership can be. And so if a caregiver is feeling as though the recommendations are complex or cumbersome, or that they are encountering barriers or encountering challenges to fully implement and kind of meet the request of the practitioner. I think bringing that to the table is really key to opening the conversation up. And I think being honest about identifying what part is difficult, right? So, you know, and it may just be kind of all the way, you know, all around difficult, but being able to better pinpoint, you know, it's I don't have time, or I don't, you know, it's hard to find the resources to continue to do this, or you know, I'm having a hard time remembering to do these things, like whatever the barrier is, being transparent so that the practitioner can help troubleshoot. Because I think different and the reason for you know, the like why it may be difficult can lead a practitioner down different roads as trying to find like solutions.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's definitely sometimes hard to balance both the wanting to meet the goals and but also needing to maybe do it a little differently or slower pace.
Right, and I think a lot of our caregivers, you know, are so, you know, they want to be able to do it all, and you know, I think it's okay to have conversations about, you know, like our limits and our limitations, and how we can find ways to work around those, and find supports that help us, you know, bridge some of those gaps that we might have.
Any questions for Dr. Hannett or for the AAC? Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Just as a reminder, this is our September program. We have an upcoming program in November that we're very, very excited about. So this program is going to be focused on technology and kind of how to navigate specifically, I think, TikTok, but they're going to also talk about social media and some of the challenges that may arise with that, and some research that is surrounding that. So I think that is scheduled for, let me make sure I'm telling you guys the right date. That is going to be October 12th at 5:30. So it's going to be an interesting talk focused on misinformation and autism, and kind of how it intersects with TikTok. And then just once again, this presentation is going to be up on our site. We're going to get that out to you guys, and it will include the resources that Dr. Hannett provided, and kind of give you guys some access to this material. I appreciate everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Dr. Hannett, for sharing this amazing work. I think it's really, really important to consider the fact that a lot of the behavioral interventions that are being, you know, used as treatment planning and they're being given to individuals are complicated, and we live in a complicated world where individuals also have their own responses to what they're experiencing. So it makes sense to think about the caregiver as well and kind of how they're doing. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.